I remember the exact moment when everything I thought I knew about family loyalty shattered into 1,000 pieces. I was lying in that hospital bed, my chest tight, each breath feeling like I was dragging air through broken glass, when my sister-in-law Vanessa leaned over me with that sickeningly sweet smile she reserves for moments when she thinks no one important is watching. Then, without warning, she reached down and yanked my oxygen tube free, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper as she hissed, "Stop pretending, Charlotte. We both know you're faking this." As if my struggle for air was nothing more than an inconvenience standing between her and my late mother's fortune. My brother David stood in the corner, his eyes fixed on the floor tiles, silent as a ghost, even as I gasped and clawed at my throat, drowning in panic and the crushing weight of betrayal. What neither of them noticed, what they couldn't have seen from where they stood, was the nurse frozen just outside the doorway, her phone raised, her eyes wide with horror as she witnessed every single second of what they'd just done. They thought it would remain their secret, buried beneath hospital paperwork and my supposed frailty. They thought the fortune my mother had carefully built and left behind would soon be theirs to divide and spend as they pleased. They had no idea that the will reading was scheduled for the following week, or that a single witness could shatter everything they'd plotted in the most public, devastating way possible. When the nurse stepped into the room and placed a steady hand on Vanessa's shoulder, speaking just 5 quiet words, the carefully constructed world they'd built around their greed began to crack wide open. I didn't say a word in that moment. I didn't need to, because what neither of them understood was that I had already begun preparing for this confrontation long before that hospital room. Long before Vanessa thought she could literally steal the breath from my lungs. And before this story reaches its end, they will both understand exactly who they tried to destroy, and why taking my last breath would have been far kinder than what I had waiting for them. My name is Charlotte Reeves. I'm 48 years old, a former architectural consultant who spent 2 decades designing sustainable housing projects across the Pacific Northwest. I always believed that if you built something with integrity and careful planning, it would stand strong against any storm. I never imagined that principle would one day become the foundation of my own survival, the blueprint for bringing down the people who thought my vulnerability made me easy prey. The fluorescent lights of Seattle General Hospital hummed above me, that constant electrical buzz that becomes the soundtrack to fear when you're lying in a narrow bed wondering if your own family wants you dead. My chest felt like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs, each breath a negotiation with lungs that seemed determined to quit on me. The doctors called it acute respiratory distress, brought on by a combination of stress and an underlying condition they were still trying to identify. They wanted to keep me for observation, maybe longer. I didn't argue. I'd learned over the past 18 months that silence could be more powerful than any protest. The door swung open without a knock. Vanessa entered first, her heels clicking against the linoleum in that sharp, aggressive rhythm she uses to announce her presence, to claim ownership of every space she enters. My brother David followed 3 steps behind, his shoulders hunched forward like he was walking into a cold wind, his eyes focused somewhere near his shoes. He looked like a man being led to his own execution, and maybe in some ways he was. "You're awake," Vanessa said. It wasn't a question, more like an accusation, as if my consciousness itself was somehow inconvenient to whatever plan she'd walked in here executing. She stopped at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, studying me the way a real estate developer studies a condemned building, calculating demolition costs versus potential profit. I said nothing. I'd stopped trying to defend myself to Vanessa almost a year ago, right around the time I realized that every word I offered her became ammunition she'd load into whatever weapon she was currently building to use against me. So, we brought the documents. She continued, reaching into her oversized designer handbag to extract a manila folder that looked suspiciously thick for what should have been simple paperwork. The ones you were supposed to sign last week before this convenient little hospital visit. End title. David shifted uncomfortably near the window, his jaw clenched tight, his hands buried deep in his pockets, like he was trying to physically restrain himself from reaching out. He wouldn't look at me. He hadn't truly looked at me, really seen me, in months, maybe years. "I'm not faking an illness, Vanessa," I said quietly, my voice still hoarse from the breathing treatments they'd given me earlier that morning. "The doctors can confirm everything." "Doctors confirm whatever patients want them to confirm," she shot back, dropping the folder onto the blanket covering my legs with enough force that it made me flinch. Especially when those patients are looking for sympathy, looking for excuses to avoid their responsibilities. "Sign the property transfer papers. Today. I'm done waiting." The property she meant was the waterfront house in Bellingham that my mother and I had renovated together 7 years ago. The home where we'd spent countless weekends stripping wallpaper and refinishing hardwood floors. Where we'd planted the garden that still bloomed every spring with her favorite lavender and white roses. The house where my mother had taken her last breath while I held her hand and whispered that I loved her, that I would always love her, that I would protect everything she'd built. Vanessa wanted it transferred into David's name, which meant into her control, into her portfolio of assets she could liquidate and convert into whatever lifestyle upgrade she'd been coveting lately. I'd been resisting for months, and my resistance had clearly become intolerable. "I need time to review the documents again," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. "This isn't something I can just sign without understanding." "You've had time," Vanessa interrupted, her voice sharpening into something that could cut glass. "You've had months. What you're doing isn't careful consideration, Charlotte. It's stalling. It's manipulation, and I won't tolerate it anymore." She stepped closer, leaning over the bed rail, until I could smell her perfume, something expensive and overwhelming that seemed designed to dominate every other scent in any room. "Sign it, or I swear I will make whatever time you have left absolutely miserable. More miserable than you already are." I looked past her, toward David, my brother, my only sibling. The boy I'd protected from playground bullies when we were kids, the teenager I'd helped with college applications, the man I'd stood beside at his wedding, even though every instinct I possessed had screamed warnings about the woman he was marrying. "David," I said softly, pleading with him to find whatever spine he'd misplaced somewhere along the way. "Say something, please." He opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes glistened with something that might have been tears, or might have been simply the reflection of overhead fluorescent lights. No words came. They hadn't come in months. Maybe they never would again. Vanessa laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the sterile walls. "He has nothing to say. He knows I'm right." She straightened, glaring down at me with undisguised contempt. "You're pathetic, you know that? A pathetic woman playing victim. Thinking you can manipulate everyone with your sad little medical emergencies." Then she reached down and yanked the oxygen tube from beneath my nose. The world disappeared into pure need. My lungs seized, empty and screaming for air that wasn't coming. I gasped, my hands flying to my throat in some primitive instinct to open an airway that didn't need opening, that just needed oxygen flowing back through the tube that was supposed to be keeping me alive. 3 seconds. 4. 5. The room started to blur at the edges, gray creeping in from my peripheral vision like smoke. And then I saw her. Nurse Rebecca Morrison stood frozen in the doorway. Her phone raised in one hand, her face a mask of absolute shock. She'd been on a video call with someone, maybe another nurse or a doctor consulting on a different case, and her camera had captured everything, every word, every threat, every second of Vanessa yanking that tube away and watching me struggle. Vanessa saw her too. Her hand flew away from the oxygen tube like it had suddenly caught fire, her expression shifting through a rapid sequence of emotions: surprise, calculation, fear, and finally settling on a mask of concern so fake it was almost insulting. But here's the strange thing, the detail that perhaps only I understood in that moment as I fought to drag air back into my starving lungs. I felt no panic. There was fear, yes. The primal terror that comes when your body screams that death is seconds away. But beneath that fear, deeper than any instinct, was something else entirely. Calm. Almost relief. A strong pair. Because I had known this day would come. My mother had warned me, during those final weeks before the cancer finally won, that Vanessa would eventually reveal her true nature. She'd made me promise to be ready, and I had been preparing, quietly and patiently, for 18 long months. In the corridor, just beyond the open doorway, I could see my niece Lily sitting on a plastic chair, her tablet clutched to her chest. She had this habit of recording things, random moments she found interesting or wanted to remember. I wondered briefly if her camera had been pointed in this direction. I wondered if anyone understood yet that the sick woman in the hospital bed wasn't a victim at all. I was a trap that had just been sprung. Nurse Morrison moved faster than I expected. Within seconds, she was across the room, her hands gentle but efficient as she replaced the oxygen tube beneath my nose. The cool flow of air returned like mercy, like forgiveness, filling my lungs with relief so profound I nearly wept. My vision cleared. My heartbeat began to slow from its panicked gallop back towards something resembling normal. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Nurse Morrison's voice was controlled, but carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Vanessa with the kind of cold fury that requires no volume to communicate absolute danger. Vanessa stepped back, her composure cracking for the first time since I'd known her. "I was just adjusting her tube. It looked loose. I was trying to help." "I watched you yank it from her face," Morrison interrupted, holding up her phone with its screen still glowing. "So did my colleague in the cardiology department, who happens to still be on this video call. Every second of what you just did is recorded. What you did constitutes elder abuse under Washington state law and assault. That's a criminal offense, potentially a felony depending on circumstances and intent." The color drained from Vanessa's face. For just a moment, she looked almost human, almost afraid. Then her mask slid back into place, though not quite as seamlessly as before. "You're misinterpreting what you saw. I'm a registered nurse with 16 years of experience," Morrison said quietly, her voice deadly calm. "I know exactly what I saw. I suggest you leave this room immediately, before I have security escort you out and call the police to file formal charges." David finally moved. He grabbed Vanessa's arm, his face pale and stricken with the dawning realization that his wife had just committed a crime in front of multiple witnesses. "We should go. Vanessa, we need to go now." She jerked away from him but didn't argue. Her eyes met mine for one burning second, filled with hatred so pure and concentrated it was almost beautiful in its intensity. Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking a faster, more agitated rhythm than when she'd entered. David followed without looking back, a ghost trailing behind the storm he'd married. The door closed. Silence filled the room, like water filling a vessel, heavy and complete. Nurse Morrison pulled a chair beside my bed and sat down, rubbing her face with one hand. She looked suddenly exhausted, as if witnessing what she'd just seen had drained something vital from her. "Ms. Reeves, are you all right?" she asked gently. "Do you need me to call anyone?" Another family member? The police? I shook my head slowly. My heart was still pounding, but my breathing had steadied. The oxygen flowed cool and clean into my lungs, and with each breath, I felt stronger, more certain of the path ahead. "I'm fine," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you for what you did." "I did what any decent person would do." She paused, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something beyond professional concern. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I did what I promised I would do." I looked at her more carefully then. Her face was familiar in a vague, half-remembered way, like someone I'd seen in an old photograph and then forgotten. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I made a promise to someone, Ms. Reeves. A promise to keep an eye on you, to make sure I was nearby if anything ever happened. Your mother asked me to watch over you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "My mother?" Morrison nodded slowly. "I was her nurse during her final months, when we moved her to palliative care. I spent many hours with Catherine Reeves. She was extraordinary, even when her body was failing. Sharp as a blade right until the end. She talked about you constantly." I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten. 3 years since she'd passed, and the grief still ambushed me at unexpected moments, rising up from wherever I'd buried it to wrap cold hands around my heart. "She was worried about you," Morrison continued gently. "She told me things about your family situation that concerned her deeply, about your brother's wife, about the way that woman looked at your family's assets, like a predator studying prey. Your mother's greatest fear wasn't death. It was leaving you unprotected." "She never told me any of this," I whispered, my voice breaking. "She didn't want to burden you. She wanted your final months together to be peaceful, not consumed by her suspicions and fears." Morrison paused, then reached into her pocket and produced a business card, slightly worn, as if it had been carried for a long time. She placed it in my hand. The name printed on the front read, "Patricia Whitmore, Attorney at Law. Your mother told me that when something happened to you, not if, but when, I should contact this woman immediately. She said Patricia Whitmore has everything you need." Morrison met my eyes with quiet intensity. "I called her this morning, Miss Reeves. The moment I heard you'd been admitted, she's already on her way." I stared at the card, at the simple black letters on cream-colored stock. My mother had been gone for 3 years, yet here she was, still orchestrating, still protecting, still loving me from somewhere beyond death's reach. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I closed my fingers around the business card and pressed it against my chest, feeling its sharp edges dig into my palm. My mother had known. She'd always known. And she'd spent her final months building a fortress around me that I was only now beginning to see. I slept poorly that night, drifting between shallow dreams where I could breathe freely and waking moments where the hospital sounds became strangely comforting. The beep of monitors, the soft footsteps of nurses making their rounds, the distant murmur of voices at the station down the hall. These sounds meant I was still here, still breathing, still holding on to everything Vanessa desperately wanted to take from me. By morning, my breathing had improved enough that the doctors started talking about discharge within a day or two. Nurse Morrison visited briefly during her shift, her manner professional but her eyes communicating something deeper. She didn't mention our conversation from the previous evening. She didn't need to. The business card was tucked safely in my phone case now, hidden where Vanessa would never think to look. I was picking at a tasteless breakfast of scrambled eggs and weak coffee when the door opened without warning. Vanessa entered alone this time, dressed in a charcoal blazer and tailored slacks, her appearance polished to the point of intimidation. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Charlotte," she said, as if yesterday had never happened, as if she hadn't yanked the oxygen from my face and watched me gasp like a fish drowning in air. "You look much better today. The color is back in your cheeks." I set down my fork and said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, unsettled her more than any argument ever could. She pulled the visitor chair close to my bed and sat down, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. "I want to apologize for yesterday. I was stressed. David and I have been dealing with some financial pressures, and I took it out on you unfairly. That was wrong of me." The apology was flawless in its delivery and completely hollow in its substance. Vanessa didn't apologize because she felt remorse. She apologized because she needed something from me, and she'd calculated that false contrition was the most efficient path to getting it. "I brought some paperwork that needs your attention," she continued, opening the leather portfolio. "Nothing complicated. Just some insurance documents that require your signature. The company has been requesting updated forms, and David's been too busy to handle it." She extracted several pages and placed them on the rolling tray table beside my bed. Her movements were casual, almost bored, as if the documents were insignificant bureaucratic annoyances. I picked up the papers and began to read. Vanessa watched me with barely concealed impatience. "You don't need to read every word, Charlotte. It's standard insurance language. Just sign at the bottom, and I'll take care of the rest." But I continued reading, slowly and carefully, the way I'd reviewed thousands of architectural contracts throughout my career. The first page was indeed insurance-related, a renewal form for a policy I vaguely recognized. The second page appeared to be a beneficiary update. The third page, however, was something else entirely. The language was dense and deliberately confusing, filled with legal terminology designed to obscure rather than clarify. But I'd spent 20 years parsing complex documents. I knew how to find meaning buried beneath layers of jargon. And there, in the fine print of paragraph 7, I found it. Property transfer authorization. Full conveyance of real estate assets effective immediately upon signature. She was trying to steal my house, not some future inheritance, not some theoretical claim on my mother's estate. She wanted me to sign away the Bellingham property while lying in a hospital bed, believing I was too sick and confused to understand what I was surrendering. My eyes flickered involuntarily toward my phone on the bedside table, just for a second, just long enough to remind myself that Nurse Morrison's contact information was saved, that Patricia Whitmore's business card was safely tucked away. Every manipulation, every threat, every scheme Vanessa had attempted over the past 18 months, I'd been documenting it all. And now I would add this moment to the record. "Is something wrong?" Vanessa asked, her voice sharpening slightly. I let my hand tremble as I set down the papers. It wasn't entirely an act. My hands did shake sometimes, a minor tremor that stress and illness had brought uninvited. But I exaggerated it now, letting the pages flutter as I released them. "My hands," I said weakly, "they're not steady today. I can't sign anything properly. The signature would be illegible." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Then I'll guide your hand. We can do it together." "No," I shook my head slowly, playing the role of the frail invalid she believed me to be. "The doctor said I need rest, perhaps in a few days, when I'm stronger." Her mask slipped then, just for a moment. The polished smile vanished, replaced by something cold and predatory. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that wouldn't carry beyond the bed. "You don't have a choice, Charlotte. This is going to happen whether you cooperate or not. The only question is whether it happens the easy way or the hard way." A small sound came from the doorway. "P." We both turned. Lily stood at the threshold, my 11-year-old niece, her tablet clutched against her chest with both hands. Her eyes were wide, fixed on her mother with an expression I recognized immediately. Pure, unfiltered fear. The kind of fear a child feels when she witnesses something she doesn't fully understand, but knows instinctively is wrong. Period. Lily's voice cracked like a whip. What are you doing here? I told you to wait in the car. Stop. Lily whispered. The nurse said I could come up. Get out, now. Wait in the hallway. Lily flinched at her mother's tone. She began backing away slowly, her small feet shuffling against the linoleum. But as she retreated, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Her tablet was still raised. The screen was facing toward the room, and in the upper corner, barely visible from my angle, a small red dot was blinking. She was recording. I didn't know if she understood what she was capturing. I didn't know if this was deliberate or simply the habit Nurse Morrison had mentioned, a child's instinct to document her world through technology. But in that moment, as my 11-year-old niece disappeared down the hospital corridor, with her tablet still clutched protectively against her chest, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Vanessa turned back to me, her composure restored as if that crack in her facade had never appeared. We'll finish this conversation later, Charlotte, when there are fewer interruptions. And Jackie gathered her documents and left without another word. I watched the empty doorway for a long time after she was gone, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously close to triumph. Lily was just a child, innocent and small and easily overlooked. But sometimes I thought, I watched the empty doorway for a long time after she was gone, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously close to triumph. The most powerful witnesses are the ones nobody notices. The hospital grew quiet as evening settled over Seattle, the city lights beginning to glow through my window like distant promises. Visiting hours ended at 8, and the steady stream of footsteps in the corridor gradually faded to the occasional soft shuffle of nurses making their rounds. My dinner tray sat untouched on the rolling table. I had no appetite. My mind was too full of calculations, too occupied with the machinery of what was finally being set into motion. I waited until the hallway outside my room fell completely silent. The clock on the wall showed 9:45. The night nurse had checked my vitals 20 minutes ago and wouldn't return for another hour unless I called. I was alone in the dim glow of monitoring equipment, surrounded by shadows and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Slowly, I reached toward the bedside drawer. The journal was exactly where I'd left it, tucked beneath a box of tissues and a paperback novel I'd brought from home but never opened. It was small, perhaps 5 by 7 inches, bound in soft brown leather that had grown supple from 18 months of constant handling. The edges of the pages were slightly yellowed, the spine creased from countless openings. To anyone who glanced at it casually, it would appear to be nothing more than a middle-aged woman's diary, unremarkable and easily dismissed. They would be catastrophically wrong. I opened the cover and began turning pages, each one filled with my careful handwriting. Dates and times marched down the margins in neat columns. Descriptions followed in precise, clinical language, the voice of an architect documenting structural failures. March 22nd, 18 months ago. Vanessa called me a burden at David's birthday dinner, said I was wasting space in a house that should be generating income. David sat across the table and said nothing. May 8th. Vanessa demanded I give her power of attorney for convenience. When I declined, she didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. July 15th. Pressured to sign household expense document. Language was vague. I signed but kept a photocopy. Later review suggested it was an attempt to establish financial control. September 3rd. Overheard Vanessa telling David that I should be moved to a care facility, that the Bellingham house was wasted on me. David said he would think about it. November 12th. Vanessa took my car keys. said I was too old to drive safely in winter conditions. Returned them only after I agreed to add her name to my credit card for emergencies. The entries continued, page after page, month after month. Every slight documented, every manipulation recorded, every threat preserved in ink that would not fade, in handwriting that remains steady despite my condition. I had been building this case for 18 months, one careful notation at a time. And Vanessa had never suspected a thing. She thought I was a confused woman, too addled by grief and illness to understand what was happening around me. She thought my silence meant submission. My patience meant weakness. She had no idea that every word she spoke in my presence was being catalogued, that every scheme she attempted was being added to a record that would one day be her undoing. I turned to a page near the middle of the journal and paused. The handwriting here was different, shakier, written during a time when my hands trembled, not from illness, but from grief. The entry was dated 3 years ago, just days before my mother passed. Mom spoke to me tonight about Vanessa. She's worried. She says she's seen the way Vanessa looks at our home, our savings, everything we've built together. She says Vanessa is waiting for her to die so she can start taking everything. I told Mom she was being paranoid. I told her Vanessa was difficult but not dangerous. Mom squeezed my hand and looked at me with those eyes that always saw more than I wanted her to see. She said I was too trusting. She said my kindness would be used against me. She made me promise to write everything down, every insult, every threat, every attempt to control or manipulate. She said not to confront Vanessa until I had proof, until the record was complete and undeniable. She said she would prepare the rest. I hadn't understood what she meant then. I'd thought it was the morphine talking, the fog of pain and approaching death clouding her thoughts. But my mother had never been clearer in her life. She spent her final weeks not saying goodbye, but building fortifications, constructing defenses I would only discover years later when I needed them most. Nurse Morrison, Patricia Whitmore, the codicil I didn't yet know existed. All of it arranged by a dying woman who loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave. I turned to the next blank page and picked up the pen I kept tucked in the journal spine. The date went first, written in the upper left corner. Then the entry, composed with the same precision I'd maintained for 18 months. Hospital admission due to respiratory distress. Vanessa arrived with David, accused me of faking illness to avoid signing documents. When I refused to comply, she removed my oxygen tube and watched me struggle to breathe. Witness present, Nurse Rebecca Morrison. Incident captured on video during active call with colleague. Additional witness possible. Lily, my niece, present in hallway with recording device. I read the entry twice, ensuring every detail was accurate. Then I closed the journal and held it against my chest, feeling the weight of 18 months of patience pressing against my heart. The room was dark now, the city lights beyond the window casting faint patterns across the ceiling. I was alone, but I didn't feel lonely. My mother was with me in these pages, in every word I'd written, in every instruction she'd given me before death stole her away. "The time has finally come, Mom," I whispered into the silence, knowing she could hear me somehow. The doctors discharged me 2 days later with instructions to rest and a prescription for medication I would probably never take. Nurse Morrison walked me to the hospital entrance herself, a gesture that went beyond professional courtesy. At the curb, she shook my hand and held it for a moment longer than necessary. "Patricia Whitmore will contact you soon," she said quietly. "Be ready for what she has to show you." I nodded and climbed into the rideshare waiting to take me home. Not to David and Vanessa's house, where I'd been pressured to stay during my illness, but to my own apartment in Capitol Hill, the place I'd maintained despite their endless campaigns to convince me I needed family nearby and someone to check on you. The familiar sight of my building, with its brick facade and flower boxes I'd planted last spring, brought relief so profound, it nearly brought tears to my eyes. I paid the driver and walked slowly up the steps, breathing in the cool Seattle air, feeling the strength returning to my body with each step. Patricia Whitmore arrived the following afternoon. She was a woman in her early 60s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Her handshake was firm, her manner direct, and within moments of meeting her, I understood why my mother had trusted her for what must have been years of planning. "Ms. Reeves," she said, settling into the armchair across from me in my living room. "I've been waiting for this meeting for 3 years. I had hoped it would never be necessary, but your mother was not a woman who left anything to chance." She placed a leather briefcase on the coffee table between us and opened it with practiced efficiency. Inside were several folders, each one labeled and organized with the precision of someone accustomed to building cases that could withstand any challenge. "Your mother came to me 9 months before she passed," Patricia continued. "She was already quite ill, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She told me she was worried about you, about what would happen after she was gone. She told me things about your family situation that concerned her deeply." "She never mentioned any of this to me," I said, my voice rough with emotion I was trying to control. "She didn't want to burden you. She wanted your final months together to be peaceful, not consumed by conflict." Patricia pulled a thick folder from the briefcase and placed it on the table. "But she also refused to leave you unprotected, so she hired a private investigator." Paragraph. I stared at the folder. It was perhaps 2 inches thick, filled with documents and photographs I couldn't yet see. "To investigate Vanessa?" She confirmed it was for her investigation everything about Vanessa Pierce. Patricia confirmed. She opened the folder and began spreading its contents across the table. "What she found was deeply disturbing, Miss Reeves. Your sister-in-law is not simply a difficult woman. She's a predator with a documented history." Pause there. Be straightforward. To the first document was a marriage certificate from Arizona, dated 9 years ago. The bride's name was Vanessa Marie Webb, née Pierce. "Vanessa was married before David," Patricia said, watching my face carefully. "Were you aware of this?" I shook my head, stunned. I had never known. Vanessa had never mentioned any previous marriage, and David certainly had never spoken of it. Had he even known? "The marriage lasted 3 years," Patricia continued. "It ended in divorce 6 years ago. The circumstances were not pleasant." She slid another document toward me, a police report with portions highlighted in yellow. Marcus Webb's mother, Eleanor Webb, was 78 years old when Vanessa moved into their home. Within 18 months, the elderly woman had filed a complaint alleging verbal abuse, financial manipulation, and on one occasion, physical intimidation. I read the highlighted sections with growing horror. The language was clinical, detached, but the picture it painted was unmistakable. Vanessa had isolated Marcus's mother from her friends, controlled her access to money, subjected her to constant psychological torment. The pattern was identical to what I'd experienced over the past 18 months, what I'd been documenting in my journal. "What happened to the complaint?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. "The family withdrew it. According to the investigator's notes, Marcus's mother was terrified of retaliation. She recanted her statement and refused to cooperate further. The case was closed without charges. But the records still exist. They do. They remain in the Arizona system, accessible to anyone who knows where to look." Patricia gathered the documents and returned them to the folder. "Your mother found them, Miss Reeves. She saw the pattern before anyone else did, and she made preparations." She reached into the briefcase again and withdrew a sealed envelope, cream-colored and slightly yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting, those familiar loops and curves I would recognize anywhere, even across the distance of 3 years. "This is the second envelope your mother left with me," Patricia said. The first contained instructions and the investigator's file. This one contains something else. Something she specified could only be opened when there was concrete evidence of abuse against you. My hand trembled as I reached for the envelope. And now there is evidence? Now there is video evidence, eyewitness testimony from a medical professional, and a documented pattern of prior behavior. Patricia placed the envelope in my hands with the gravity of someone delivering something sacred. Your mother knew exactly who your sister-in-law was, and she spent her final months making sure you would never be defenseless. The envelope felt heavier than paper should weigh. I held it for a long moment, staring at my mother's handwriting, tracing the familiar curves with eyes that had grown blurry. Patricia sat quietly, giving me space to absorb what was happening, understanding that some moments require silence. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside were two items. The first was a legal document, several pages bound together with a small clip. The second was a single sheet of stationery, folded once, covered in handwriting I would recognize until the day I died. I began with the legal document. The heading identified it as a codicil, a formal amendment to a last will and testament. The language was dense with legal terminology, but Patricia had prepared me for this, and I read through it carefully, absorbing each clause and condition. The core provision was devastating in its simplicity. If there is proven evidence of abuse, whether physical, psychological, or financial, against Charlotte Marie Reeves by any party connected to beneficiaries of this estate, the inheritance share designated for that beneficiary shall be immediately and irrevocably revoked. Said share shall be transferred in its entirety to the Catherine Reeves Foundation for Elder Protection, to be used for the support of abuse victims and their families. I read the paragraph 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each reading. The implications were staggering. Vanessa had spent 18 months maneuvering to gain control of our family's assets through David. She'd assumed that once my mother was gone, there would be no obstacles remaining. She'd never imagined that my mother would build a tripwire into her own will, a mechanism designed to activate the moment Vanessa's true nature was exposed. The signatures at the bottom confirmed its legitimacy. My mother's signature came first, slightly shaky but unmistakably hers. Written during those final months when her strength was fading but her resolve remained iron. Below it was Patricia Whitmore's notary seal and signature. And beneath those were 2 witness signatures that made my breath catch. Dr. Samuel Chen, James Northwood. Samuel was my mother's oncologist, the man who'd guided her through her final battle with such compassion and skill. James was my oldest friend, someone I'd known since college at the University of Washington, someone I'd trusted implicitly for over 25 years. We drifted apart somewhat in recent years, as friends often do when life pulls them in different directions, but apparently my mother had reached out to him without my knowledge. She'd assembled allies from every corner of my life, people she trusted to stand by me when she no longer could. I set the codicil aside and unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of the jasmine perfume my mother had worn for 40 years. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, allowing myself one moment of pure memory before reading her final words to me. My dearest Charlotte, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have been realized. I prayed that I was wrong about Vanessa, that my suspicions were nothing more than the paranoia of a dying woman. But I know what I saw in her eyes. I know the pattern of her behavior. She is waiting for me to die so she can begin taking everything we built together. I know you, my love. I know you better than you know yourself. You will not fight for your own sake. You will make excuses for her cruelty. You will absorb her abuse in silence because you believe that keeping peace is more important than protecting yourself. But you are wrong. You deserve protection. You deserve dignity. You deserve to live your remaining years surrounded by people who genuinely love you. So I'm fighting for you. even though I will not be there to see the battle. Forgive my presumption. Forgive me for making decisions without consulting you. But I would rather be wrong about Vanessa and have this codicil sit unused forever than leave you defenseless against a predator. Everything is in place. Patricia has her instructions. Dr. Chen and Nurse Morrison have theirs. James will stand with you when you need him. All that remains is for you to find the courage to use what I have given you. You are stronger than you believe, Charlotte. You have always been strong. You simply needed someone to remind you. I love you. I will always love you. And I will be watching over you, somehow, until we meet again. Forever yours, Mom. The letter trembled in my hands as tears I'd been holding back for 3 years finally broke through. They streamed down my face, dropped onto my shirt, onto the letter, onto the codicil that represented my mother's final act of love. She had known. She'd always known. And while cancer ravaged her body, while death approached with terrible certainty, she'd spent her remaining strength not on goodbyes, but on fortifications. She'd built an entire system of protection around me, a fortress constructed from legal documents and trusted allies, and a love so fierce it refused to die, even when she did. I pressed the letter against my chest and wept openly, no longer caring what Patricia might think. These weren't tears of grief alone. They were tears of gratitude, of wonder, of love that transcended the boundary between life and death. You didn't presume, Mom, I whispered to the empty air, knowing somehow that she could hear me. You simply knew me better than I knew myself. Patricia left shortly after I composed myself, promising to return the following day to discuss next steps. She took the codicil with her for safekeeping. But I kept my mother's letter. I couldn't bear to let it out of my sight. That night I slept with it on the pillow beside me, as if her words could protect me even in dreams. 3 days passed in relative peace. I spent them quietly, reading through my journal, organizing the evidence I'd accumulated, speaking occasionally with Patricia by phone. I knew the calm wouldn't last. Vanessa was not the type to accept silence. She would come eventually, and I needed to be ready. She arrived on the 4th day. I heard her car pull into the visitor parking space below my apartment before I saw it, the aggressive rumble of her SUV announcing her presence like a warning siren. I was sitting in my living room with a cup of tea, deliberately positioned where I could see the door. I'd learned over the months that it was better to face Vanessa directly than to be caught off guard. The buzzer rang. I pressed the intercom button without speaking. "Charlotte, it's Vanessa. Buzz me up. We need to talk." I pressed the button to unlock the building entrance and opened my apartment door, leaving it ajar. If she was coming, I wanted no closed doors between us and the hallway, no private spaces where there wouldn't be potential witnesses. She appeared moments later, Lily trailing 3 steps behind her. My niece looked smaller than usual, her shoulders hunched, her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Charlotte," Vanessa said, sweeping into my apartment as if she owned it. "I heard you discharged yourself from the hospital. You should have called. David was worried." "I'm fine," I said evenly. "The doctors cleared me to go home." "This home." She glanced around my living room with barely concealed calculation, that same look she'd given my mother's Bellingham property. "You know, it's really not practical for someone in your condition. All these stairs, no elevator. What if something happens and you can't get help?" I said nothing. Responding to her provocations only gave her ammunition. She moved through the room, trailing her fingers along my furniture, examining photographs on the bookshelf. "We should discuss practical arrangements. I have some ideas that would benefit everyone." "I'm sure you do." Something flickered in her eyes at my tone, but she didn't pursue it. Instead, she excused herself to use the bathroom, disappearing down the hallway with that confident stride of someone who believed she controlled every situation. The moment she was gone, Lily moved. My niece crossed the room with surprising speed, her small feet barely making a sound. She stopped in front of me, trembling visibly, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination that seemed far too mature for her 11 years. "Aunt Charlotte," she whispered urgently, "I have something I need to show you before Mom comes back." She thrust her tablet toward me with shaking hands. The screen was illuminated, displaying a folder filled with video files, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, each one labeled with a date and a brief description written in a child's careful lettering. "What is this, sweetheart?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. "Videos," Lily said, her voice barely audible. "Of Mom, when she's mean to you." My heart began to pound. I started scrolling through the folder, reading the titles with growing amazement. April 3rd, Mom yelling at Aunt Charlotte about money. May 15th, Mom calling Aunt Charlotte useless. June 22nd, Mom making Aunt Charlotte sign papers. The dates stretched back 8 months, covering a period of abuse I'd been documenting in my journal, but never imagined anyone else had witnessed. I opened one video at random. The footage was shaky, filmed from an angle that suggested Lily had been hiding behind furniture. But the audio was crystal clear. Vanessa's voice filled my small living room, sharp and cruel, berating me for being slow, for being a burden, for taking up space in a family that didn't want me. I watched myself on the screen, sitting quietly, absorbing her abuse with that practiced patience of someone who'd learned that resistance only made things worse. "There's more," Lily whispered. She reached over and scrolled to a video near the end of the folder. The label read, "Hospital, Mom, and the Tube." I pressed play with trembling fingers. The footage showed the hospital room doorway, filmed from the hallway. Through the gap, I could see myself in the bed, Vanessa standing over me. The audio captured every word of her threat, every syllable of her contempt. And then, with terrible clarity, it captured the moment she yanked the oxygen tube from my face. I stopped the video. My hands were shaking. "Lily," I managed. "Why? Why did you do this?" Tears spilled down her small cheeks. "Before Grandma Catherine went to heaven, she told me something. She said if anyone ever hurts Aunt Charlotte, I should make sure you know. Make sure you have proof." I didn't understand what she meant at first. My mother, even Lily, even my young niece had been recruited into this network of protection. "But then Mom started being so mean to you," Lily continued through her tears. "And I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared you wouldn't believe me or that Mom would find out, and," she hiccuped, "so I just recorded everything, so you would know. So you would believe me?" I pulled Lily into my arms and held her tightly, feeling her small body shake with the release of emotions she'd been suppressing for 8 months. My own tears fell freely, dropping into her hair. My mother's protection had extended even further than I'd imagined. She hadn't only prepared allies and legal documents. She'd prepared my niece to bear witness, to carry a burden no child should have to carry. "You did perfectly, sweetheart," I whispered. "Grandma Catherine would be so proud of you." The bathroom door opened. Vanessa emerged, her expression already suspicious. "What's going on here? Lily, what are you showing her?" Lily jerked away from me, clutching the tablet to her chest, her eyes wide with sudden panic. "Nothing, Mom. Just some videos I made at school." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She held out her hand. "Give me the tablet, Lily." "No." The word came out so softly I almost didn't hear it, but I did, and so did Vanessa. "What did you say to me?" I said no. Lily's voice was louder now, trembling but determined. "These are my videos. Mine. You can't have them." Vanessa took a step forward, her face darkening with a rage I recognized from countless encounters. "Give me that tablet right now, or I swear." "Or you'll what?" I stood up, positioning myself between Vanessa and Lily. "Hit her? Scream at her like you scream at me? Go ahead, Vanessa. But know that if you take one more step toward your daughter, I'm calling the police." She stopped, her hand frozen in mid-reach, her eyes locked on mine. For the first time in 18 months, I wasn't the one backing down. "Get out of my apartment," I said quietly, "now." Vanessa's face went through several expressions: shock, fury, calculation. Finally, she settled on contempt. "This isn't over, Charlotte. You can play your little games, but you're still just a sick, pathetic woman with no one on your side. David will never choose you over me. Never." "We'll see about that," I said. "Now get out." She left, her heels clicking in angry rhythm down the hallway. The building door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Lily stood in my living room, still clutching her tablet, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Aunt Charlotte. I'm so sorry. She's going to be so mad at me." "No, sweetheart," I said gently, kneeling down to her level. "You're coming to stay with me for a while. Your mom doesn't get to be mad at you anymore." I called Patricia Whitmore immediately. Then I called Nurse Morrison. Then I called David, my brother, and told him in no uncertain terms that his daughter needed protection from his wife, and if he couldn't provide it, I would. Within 2 hours, Patricia had filed an emergency petition for temporary custody based on evidence of an unsafe environment. The videos Lily had recorded were submitted to Child Protective Services. David, faced with the reality of what his wife had become, didn't contest it. Lily moved in that night, bringing 2 suitcases and her tablet. I set her up in my spare bedroom, the one I'd been using for storage, and we spent the evening organizing her things and not talking about her mother. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. That night, after Lily fell asleep clutching her tablet like a lifeline, I sat in my living room and copied every single video file onto a secure drive that Patricia would collect in the morning. Hours of footage, months of abuse, documented by a child who'd been trying to protect me the only way she knew how. My mother had built her fortress well, but even she couldn't have imagined that the strongest wall would be built by an 11-year-old girl with a tablet and more courage than most adults I'd ever known. The attack came exactly 1 week after Lily moved in with me. I'd been expecting it, honestly. Vanessa was not the type to accept defeat gracefully, and having her daughter removed from her custody, even temporarily, would have been the ultimate humiliation. Patricia had warned me to be careful, to vary my routine, to make sure I was never completely alone. But I'd grown complacent. Or maybe I'd just been tired. Either way, I made the mistake of answering my door without checking the peephole first. Vanessa stood on my doorstep, her face twisted with a rage so pure it was almost inhuman. Behind her, David hovered uncertainly, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "Where is she?" Vanessa demanded, pushing past me into my apartment before I could react. "Where's my daughter? You have no right to keep her from me." "I have a court order," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my racing heart. "You're not supposed to be here, Vanessa. Leave now or I'm calling—" She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin hard enough to leave marks. "You turned my own child against me. You poisoned her mind with your lies. You're going to give her back, and then you're going to drop all these ridiculous accusations." "They're not accusations," I said, wrenching my arm free. "They're documented facts, and your daughter isn't property you can demand back. She's a child who's been living in fear of you for months." "Liar!" Vanessa's hand shot out and shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall behind me with enough force to knock a framed photo to the floor. Glass shattered. "Vanessa, stop!" David finally found his voice, moving to grab his wife's arm. "This isn't helping. Let's just go." But she wasn't listening. She was staring at something over my shoulder, and when I turned to look, my blood ran cold. Lily stood in the hallway leading to the bedrooms, her tablet raised, the red recording light blinking steadily. "Hello, Mom," Lily said quietly. "I got everything." Vanessa's face went through a transformation I'll never forget. From rage to shock to a kind of desperate calculation. She took a step toward Lily, her hand outstretched. "Baby, give Mommy the tablet. We need to talk. Just you and me." No, Lily didn't move. Aunt Charlotte was right. "You're mean. You hurt people. And I'm not scared of you anymore." Something inside Vanessa seemed to snap then. She lunged toward Lily with a speed that caught everyone off guard. But I was faster. I threw myself between them, and Vanessa's momentum carried her into me instead. We both went down, crashing into my coffee table. I felt something in my wrist crack, a sharp pain that shot up my arm. David finally did something useful. He grabbed Vanessa and physically hauled her away from me, restraining her even as she screamed and fought against him. "I'm calling the police," Lily said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Don't move, Mom." Vanessa's face had gone pale. The rage was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. She'd just assaulted me in front of 2 witnesses, including her own daughter, who had recorded the entire encounter. The police arrived within minutes. So did Patricia Whitmore, whom I'd had on speed dial since all of this began. The officers took statements from everyone. They looked at the fresh bruises on my arm, at my swelling wrist, at the shattered glass and overturned furniture. They looked at the video Lily had recorded. Then they arrested Vanessa Pierce for assault and violation of a restraining order that Patricia had apparently filed without telling me, wanting it to be a surprise for situations exactly like this. I watched from my doorway as they led her to the patrol car in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally completely shattered. She was screaming threats, promises that she would destroy me, that I would regret this, that no one would believe me, but everyone already did. David stayed after the police left, looking shell-shocked. He sat heavily on my couch, his head in his hands. Lily had retreated to her room, emotionally exhausted. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "God, Charlotte, I'm so sorry. For all of it. For not standing up to her. For not protecting you. For not protecting my own daughter." I didn't say anything. What could I say? Sorry wasn't enough to undo 18 months of abuse. Sorry didn't heal the damage that had been done. "I'm filing for divorce," he continued. "I should have done it years ago. I was just scared. Of losing Lily. Of being alone. Of admitting that I'd made a massive mistake marrying her in the first place." "You were scared," I said quietly. "I understand that, David, but your fear meant I suffered. Your fear meant your daughter grew up documenting abuse because she didn't think her own father would protect her." He flinched like I'd hit him. I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to know that I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better for Lily, and for what it's worth, for you too." "Actions, David," I said. "Not words. Show me." He nodded and left. The weeks that followed moved with the grinding inevitability of justice too long delayed. Vanessa's attorney attempted every legal maneuver available, but the evidence was overwhelming. The hospital video, Lily's recordings, my journal documenting 18 months of psychological abuse, the investigator's report about her previous victim in Arizona. The prosecutor charged her with assault, elder abuse, and attempted fraud related to the property documents she tried to make me sign. Her attorney negotiated a plea agreement, but the consequences were severe. 18 months in jail, 3 years probation after release, a permanent restraining order, and restitution for my medical bills and legal fees. But Washington wasn't the only state seeking accountability. Arizona authorities, alerted by Patricia to Vanessa's history, reopened their investigation into the abuse of Marcus Webb's mother. New charges were filed there as well. Vanessa Pierce's carefully constructed life had collapsed entirely. David filed for divorce the same week Vanessa accepted her plea agreement. The proceedings were remarkably swift and uncontested. he was awarded full custody of Lily, along with what modest assets remained after legal fees consumed their savings. But Lily chose to stay with me, at least for a while. The court approved a temporary arrangement while David rebuilt his life, found stable employment, and established a home where his daughter could feel safe. She settled into my spare bedroom with surprising ease. We established routines: breakfast together before school, homework at the kitchen table, weekend trips to Pike Place Market or the Seattle waterfront. Slowly, gradually, I watched the fear fade from her eyes, replaced by something that looked remarkably like peace. David visited every weekend without fail. At first, our conversations were stilted, burdened by years of betrayal and fresh wounds. But he showed up consistently, proved himself through actions rather than words. He went to therapy. He attended Lily's school events. He slowly, painfully began to rebuild trust. One evening, about 6 months after everything had fallen apart and started to rebuild, he sat in my living room and said what he'd been trying to say for months. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Charlotte. I stood by while she tortured you. I chose my fear over my responsibility. I abandoned you when you needed me most." His voice was thick with emotion. "I abandoned my own daughter." I thought of my mother's letter, her words about courage and protection. I thought of Lily, sleeping peacefully down the hall, no longer afraid. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," I said slowly. "If it were, none of us would ever receive it. Forgiveness is about choosing to let go of anger, choosing to release the poison that bitterness leaves behind." David looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "But trust is different," I continued. "Trust cannot be given. It has to be rebuilt, one action at a time, one kept promise after another. You broke my trust, David. You'll have to earn it back." "I will," he said quietly, "however long it takes." The door to Lily's room opened. She padded out in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes sleepily. When she saw us sitting together, she smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached all the way to her eyes. "Are we okay?" she asked, looking between her father and me. "Are we going to be okay?" I reached out my hand and she took it. David did the same from the other side. "We're going to be fine, sweetheart," I said. "We're family. We're going to be just fine." The formal reading of my mother's will took place in Patricia Whitmore's office 3 weeks later. The timing had been deliberately delayed until after Vanessa's criminal proceedings concluded, ensuring that nothing could interfere with the execution of my mother's wishes. I arrived early with David, who had been granted permission to attend despite technically being disinherited by the codicil. Patricia had argued that he deserved to understand the full scope of what his mother had done, what she'd known, and why she'd made the choices she'd made. Dr. Samuel Chen was already seated when we entered, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression professionally neutral. Beside him sat James Northwood, my old college friend. James caught my eye and nodded, a gesture of solidarity that meant more than words could express. Patricia stood at the head of the conference table, arranging documents with meticulous precision. A large screen had been mounted on the wall behind her, currently dark but ominously present. "Now that everyone is here," Patricia began, "we can proceed with the formal reading of the last will and testament of Catherine Eleanor Reeves." She opened a leather folder and withdrew the original will, the one my mother had drafted years before her diagnosis. The primary provisions were straightforward. I was named the principal beneficiary of her estate. David received a smaller portion, held in trust with specific conditions. However, Patricia continued, removing a second document, there is an additional instrument that must be considered. A codicil signed and notarized 6 months after the original will. She began to read aloud, her voice clear and deliberate. "I, Catherine Eleanor Reeves, being of sound mind and under no duress, do hereby amend my last will and testament with the following provisions. If at any time following my death there exists proven evidence of abuse, whether physical, psychological, or financial, against my daughter Charlotte Marie Reeves, perpetrated by any party connected to beneficiaries of this estate, the following consequences shall apply. Patricia paused, letting the words sink in. The inheritance share designated for David Michael Reeves shall be permanently and irrevocably revoked. Said share shall be transferred in its entirety to the Catherine Reeves Foundation for Elder Protection, established for the purpose of supporting abuse victims and their families. David lowered his head. He'd known this was coming, had accepted it as the consequence of his years of cowardice. But hearing the words spoken aloud, channeled through our mother's intentions, seemed to strike him with fresh force. The codicil further specifies, Patricia continued, that all remaining assets of the estate, including but not limited to real property, financial accounts, investment portfolios, and personal effects, shall pass solely and entirely to Charlotte Marie Reeves, to be disposed of according to her wishes, without restriction or condition. She set down the document and looked directly at where Vanessa would have been sitting had she not been incarcerated. To be absolutely clear, Vanessa Pierce, as the spouse of a disinherited beneficiary, has no claim to any portion of this estate. The property she attempted to acquire through manipulation and forgery belongs entirely to Charlotte Reeves. Parenthesis. Patricia clicked a remote, and the screen behind her flickered to life. But instead of evidence or documents, it showed my mother's face. Parenthesis. She was sitting up in her hospital bed, thin and pale, but with eyes that burned with fierce intelligence. The video was dated 3 weeks before she died. "Strong, Charlotte," she said, and even through the speakers her voice wrapped around me like an embrace. "If you're watching this, it means everything I feared has happened. It means Vanessa has shown her true nature and you've been forced to defend yourself." She paused, gathering strength. "I want you to understand why I did what I did. Why I spent my final months preparing instead of simply saying goodbye." TKP. The room was completely silent. Even David was transfixed, watching our mother speak from beyond death. I saw how Vanessa looked at our home, our savings, everything we built together. She looked at your vulnerability like a predator measuring prey. And I knew she would wait until I was gone to strike. TKP. My mother leaned closer to the camera. "I knew you wouldn't see it, Charlotte. You're too kind, too trusting. You always want to believe the best in people. It's one of the things I love most about you, and one of the things that terrifies me about leaving you behind." Tears were streaming down my face, but I couldn't look away. TKP. So I prepared. The codicil, the investigator, Dr. Chen and Nurse Morrison, Patricia and James. Everything you needed to fight back is in place. All that's left is for you to use it. Her expression softened. "Don't forgive cruelty, Charlotte. Don't confuse forgiveness with letting someone continue to harm you. Protecting yourself isn't revenge. It's self-respect, it's dignity, and it's what I need you to do because I can't be there to protect you anymore." She leaned even closer, and for a moment it felt like she could see me across the distance of death. "I love you, my darling daughter. I have loved you since the moment you were born, and I will love you long after this body turns to dust. Live well, fight well, and know that I am watching over you somehow, always." The video ended. The screen went dark. I sat in the silence that followed, my heart both broken and full. My mother had loved me enough to wage war from her deathbed. She'd loved me enough to build an entire fortress of protection that would activate only when I needed it most. Patricia allowed the moment to settle before speaking again. Catherine Reeves left one final instruction for me to deliver after this reading. She withdrew a small jewelry box from her briefcase and placed it in front of me. Inside was my mother's wedding ring, the simple gold band she'd worn for 43 years. And beneath it, a note in her handwriting. Wear this when you need to remember that you are loved, that you are protected, that you are never ever alone. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Some people think vulnerability means weakness. They look at grief and illness and see only opportunities for exploitation. They see someone struggling and assume that person has no defenses, no allies, no plan. They are catastrophically wrong. My mother taught me that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about building a foundation so solid that even after you fall, even after you're gone, the people you love remain protected. It's about loving someone so fiercely that death itself becomes irrelevant to that protection. 18 months after that hospital room, after Vanessa yanked the oxygen from my face and thought she'd won, I stood in the Bellingham house, my house now, fully and legally mine, and looked out at the garden my mother and I had planted together. The white roses were blooming. Lavender filled the air with its calming scent. Lily was in the yard with David, laughing as they tried to assemble a new arbor for the climbing roses. My brother was keeping his promises. Slowly, carefully, he was rebuilding trust through actions rather than words. It would take time, maybe years, but we were finding our way back to something that resembled family. Vanessa was serving her sentence in a Washington state facility, facing additional charges in Arizona. The pattern of her predatory behavior had been exposed, documented, made public. She would never hurt anyone the way she'd hurt me again. I touched my mother's ring, feeling its familiar weight on my finger. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered to the empty room, to the garden beyond, to wherever she was watching from, for everything, for knowing me, for protecting me, for loving me enough to fight even when you couldn't hold my hand anymore. Somewhere in the soft afternoon light, I felt her presence, a warmth that had nothing to do with sunshine, a certainty that transcended death. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. This story you've just heard is more than entertainment. It's a reminder that vulnerability is not weakness, that patience can be its own form of power, and that love, true, fierce, unconditional love, finds ways to protect us even across the boundary of death itself. Charlotte Reeves was not a helpless victim waiting to be rescued. She was a survivor who'd been quietly preparing, building her case one documented incident at a time. And Catherine, even in death, proved that a mother's love can reach beyond life itself to shelter the daughter she left behind. The fortress she built, constructed from legal documents, loyal allies, and love that refused to die, stood strong when it mattered most. It caught Charlotte before she could fall. It gave her the weapons she needed to fight back. And it proved that sometimes the greatest battles are won not through confrontation, but through careful preparation and the courage to use what you've been given. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of voices that refuse to be silenced, of truths that demand to be heard, of women who stand together even when the world tries to tear us apart. Your support means everything. Every like, every subscription, every comment telling me where you're listening from, it all matters. It reminds me that we're not alone in this fight for dignity, justice, and the right to be protected from those who would exploit our vulnerabilities. Remember, it's never too late to fight for what you deserve. It's never too late to document the truth. It's never too late to discover that the people who truly love you have been building fortresses around you all along, waiting for the moment when you're strong enough to use them. Until next time, this is Charlotte Reeves, reminding you that your voice matters, your story matters, and your strength is greater than you know.